Good afternoon, Irina Slav. Good morning, David Blackmon.
Hello.
Morning.
Good to see you both.
Yeah,
Same.
that's very good. Fuel prices are growing more than expected. You can see Reuters, May 6th this year, US fuel price surged faster than crude as exports tightened market. This for the US. For Bulgaria, Irina, to seek exemption from European Union oil embargo on Russia is possible, deputy says. Interesting. In Brazil, Petrobras increased jet fuel price by about 7% this day and 15% for gasoline. It's a very high price. David, why those things are happening in the world this time?
Oh man, we just have such an undersupplied market. The volumes of Russian crude continue to fall off the market as these sanctions are imposed at increasingly high levels, and the market has begun also, I think, anticipating EU sanctions on Russian oil, and refining margins are continuing to get higher and higher. I know here in the United States, and so we see retail prices for fuel going up pretty dramatically. For gasoline, for example, we are less than 1 cent below the all-time record high now, according to AAA, on the average retail price at the pump. We will surpass that tomorrow, I'm sure, because prices are going to continue to rise. A big part of the problem, I think, is, well, there's two big problems in addition to Russia. One is that the OPEC plus countries, with the exceptions of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, appear to be out of excess capacity to produce, essentially. We've had disruptions in countries like Libya and Nigeria, pretty significant production reductions due to wars and other things happening in those countries. And here in the United States, thanks to our ESG investor community, the pressures coming from these climate hysteria focused investor groups, oil companies, corporate oil companies, remain more focused on stock buyback programs and returning money to investors than they are on increasing production. And that is as it should be. Corporations should respond to pressures coming from their investors. And I mean, that's what they're in business to do. One writer at the Houston Chronicle over the weekend wrote a pretty scathing opinion piece, which was completely wrongheaded, blaming the energy crisis on big oil, which this writer always does, blames everything on big oil. But the fact is that these corporations are simply doing what they're in business to do. And, anyone who thought they would behave any differently doesn't understand how the markets work and how the industry works. So we're in a situation, essentially, where the United States is basically, along with Saudi Arabia and the UAE, the only swing producers who can increase production very quickly and significantly, and none of them are doing it. With the other two countries, it's because they're part of the OPEC plus agreement and they have their own system that they're working through. And here in the US, it's, basically because of investor pressures and pressure from the government. And so here we are at the energy crisis. I know we all saw coming months, if not years ago, and it's arrived a little quicker than I thought it would, but here we are.
Yeah, Irina, European countries, they import, products, or they have their own refineries to process the crude oil?
They do import fuels, but they also have their refineries, yes. But it doesn't really matter because they import a lot of crude oil as well as fuels. So if they want to get rid of the oil and the products, they will need to find other sources for crude oil to process in those refineries. Bulgaria's one single refinery, which is the biggest on the Balkans, but it's the only one for the country. It's owned by Lukoil, and it processes predominantly Russian crude. And our finance minister made a statement last week saying he sees no reason why this refinery couldn't work with another kind of crude. I mean, first of all, your finance minister, don't talk about energy, please. And if you want to talk about energy, do some research. I mean, it should be a no-brainer, but clearly anyone who knows a little bit, because I know just a little bit about the oil industry, not being part of the industry, but writing about it. And even I know that refineries can't just switch like that from one kind of oil to another.
Sounds like he's been talking to our Secretary of Energy here in the United States.
Yeah.
It's the same in Brazil. All of them are the same. And the prices are soaring in Europe too, like in the United States. In Brazil, of course.
Yeah. But most countries are helping. I mean, they're covering some of the increase. Italy, France, the UK, Germany too, I think. They are taking some of this additional load on buyers. Not Bulgaria, though. We're way too rich to have to do this.
And how is the process of inflation and recession? In Europe, I know that the employment's not so good. The United States is very strong employment at this time, no? And Brazil is, as the same, is a very challenging process of employment level here in Brazil. How is this in the United States, David?
In the United States, our rate of unemployment, as it is calculated by the Department of Labor, is quite low, and that's a good thing. But of course, the way it's calculated is not necessarily reflective of what's really happening in our economy. Our rate of inflation is huge. It's 8.5% is the official number from the government, but in reality, that is, and it's not the fault of the Biden administration. I mean, the way they calculate that has been severely understated since they changed the formula in 1992. And so real rate of inflation here in the United States is probably, 20% or higher. In the grocery store, it's 30%. I mean, beef prices are double what they were 2 years ago, and just continue to go up every month. So the real rate of inflation here in the United States is incredibly punitive, and the high price for diesel, which is well above previous all-time record highs, plays a big part in that, because everything's transported by trucks and trains that run on diesel. So it's a really bad situation. And honestly, I mean, we're going to have tremendous social unrest in this country if this continues for much longer. And it's very, our administration either has no idea or no intention of doing anything to really address it.
There's actually, there's actually an outflow of people. People are quitting work and not going into another job. The great resignation.
But how do they live without employment?
Well, during the pandemic years, as much as I followed the topic, I didn't follow it very closely, but I read about a lot of people quitting their, for example, corporate job to start their own business.
Yeah.
Or if they have the means to support themselves for a while. I think this has to do more with the pandemic than anything any government does. Well, excluding the lockdowns, which were government instituted. But yeah, and in the UK as well, people of 50 and older are quitting their jobs because they say they have enough savings to last them a while, and they're choosing to stop working and start living, make up for probably time lost working, or something like that. People's mentality is changing, and this could be really huge over the longer term.
And of course, that thought process can be very problematic if inflation continues.
Oh yeah,
because you're particularly with the stock market crashing globally, and most people have their savings invested in the stock market. So as the balance in your retirement funds are going down, inflation's going up and eating a bigger and bigger chunk out of it. This is, it's all simple economics 101 that governments across the world, at least in the Western world, appear to have either not learned or forgotten. And this is the worst economic situation really I've ever seen in my lifetime. And I'm so old, I lived through the Carter administration, so that's saying a lot.
And what are the consequences that we can have? I mean, electricity shortage and food supply shortage, what kind of consequence we can have in Europe, for instance? Irina, you see something like that?
Well, both are very likely. I'm not sure about shortages of food, but if prices become prohibitive, consumption will decline. People will struggle to make ends meet, and that's very far from okay. And that has a lot to do with fuel prices, as David pointed out, and with electricity prices. And we're still going on about renewable energy and the massive build out of renewable capacity, which is not happening fast. It's not happening anywhere near fast enough. In the UK, for example, now wind and solar developers are crying out because they are facing delays of up to 10 years, between 6 and 10 years, to get cleared to connect their new solar farms and wind parks to the grid. What are you actually doing? You want renewable energy, but you're making people that build the renewable energy capacity wait for years. In the meantime, you have soaring gas prices, you have soaring electricity bills, and it's not just in the UK. I mean, it's good that the European Union and the UK has stringent regulation about grid connections to make sure that the grid can withstand the new capacity. But you're not taking care to secure energy supplies for the meantime until you clear this new capacity to get connected to the grid. So on the one hand, Europe, including the UK, wants to get low carbon despite inflation in raw materials and everything. They want to get rid of their main supplier of oil and gas and coal. They're desperately looking for alternative supplies from the US, which is also beginning to feel the pinch of high gas demand, and prices are rising in the US as well for US consumers. And basically they're running in circles, but it's a series of really vicious circles.
Yeah, it is. So it's interesting to me because, oil and gas has always had this issue, an issue that is specific to geology. You can only drill for oil and gas where the oil and gas exists under the ground, right? So that's all geology. Wind and solar have an issue related to geography because in the US and in Europe and other parts of the world, the population centers don't really sit in the areas that are best for wind power and solar power to be sited. So you end up with the situation, and we had it in Texas, where the government goes in and it passes these big subsidies to build these big wind farms and solar farms out in the desert of West Texas or the deserts of California. And so you get the capacity built, and then you spend the next 10 to 15 years figuring out how you're going to finance and build the power lines to take the energy they're creating to the population centers. And in Texas, that was a 15-year process before the first ones finally got built to bring the wind power from West Texas into the Dallas and Houston markets. And this is happening all over the world. And in the meantime, you have Elon Musk. And I know I've said this before on this podcast, but last September, Elon Musk pointed out to the fact that just for the growth, to accommodate the growth in electric vehicles alone, that is projected by the IEA to take place over the next 15 years, you're going to have to triple the generating capacity on the grid in the United States. And the thought that you're going to be able to do that with solar and wind and nothing else is literally insane. It cannot happen. It will not happen. And so these grid managers, and Arena linked to a story in the Wall Street Journal this morning on Twitter that is quoting the grid managers in Texas and California and in the Midwestern grid, suddenly waking up to the reality that, just thinking that adding capacity from wind and solar is the same as adding it from natural gas and coal is really not the right way to think about this. They're finally beginning to wake up to the reality of the crisis that they themselves, the agencies they manage, and the policymakers that fund them have created. And it is an emergency, but it's an emergency of policy and an emergency of logic. That we've been tied up in this hysterical narrative over climate change for 20 years now, and all these chickens are coming home to roost at the same time. And it's a really dire situation in a lot of parts of the free world. And honestly, I just don't, as bad as the situation is now, where energy is concerned and the economy is concerned, I think it is going to get far, far worse before it starts to get better, because what's going to happen is a major round of social unrest that forces these policymakers to start behaving rationally where energy is concerned.
With the summer season arriving, is there any chance to have a shortage for electricity, air conditioning supply, and so things like that?
Oh, yes, certainly. We will in California and Texas, without any question. We'll have blackouts this summer.
They're already warning about it. Yeah. But David, how do you explain this? These grid managers, they are professionals. They're not ESG investors. They're not environmental lobbyists. They are professionals. They should know their electricity, their demand and supply, and their infrastructure. How do you explain this?
Well, Anthony Fauci's a professional too, and he had no clue how to respond to COVID-19. Our professional class, our expert class here in the United States is really the most failed class in our entire society, I think. And it goes across all elements of our society. It's not just Fauci and these grid managers, it's everywhere. And we have, quote, scientists if your science is so malleable, it changes with the release of every political poll and every new narrative, every new report from the IEA, and every new narrative that they're spinning about climate change. And it's not really science at all. And unfortunately, due largely, and I'm hoping Elon Musk will help to resolve some of this, due largely to the abuses of freedom of speech in our society by the social media giants. Our society, ordinary people have been intimidated from speaking the truth about these things, because if you say the truth on Twitter about certain things, that is now, if 2 years ago, if you pointed out that these vaccines are not as effective as they're being advertised, you would be banned from Twitter and Facebook. But now that's just an accepted truth. The real effectiveness of the Pfizer vaccine is 12%, not 95%, as we were being told. And the Johnson and Johnson vaccine, you're being told not to even take it because it's not safe. Okay. But if you had said that a year ago, you'd have been immediately banned from Twitter. And so the social media giants have played a big role in this, and the same principles have applied to talking any discussions about climate change and energy. And so they have really helped create this situation. And I'm really hopeful that Mr. Musk, with his takeover of Twitter, will start to move that in a better direction.
That'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah, it's good. And Twitter is so important for the communication. It's one of the strongest one. No, so what others you have for this kind of communication? Twitter, Facebook,
well,
LinkedIn.
Yeah, and LinkedIn is very effective. I think. I know people use things like TikTok and Instagram, which
That's
I
for the
don't even
kids.
want to learn. Yeah, I just
Just
don't
for the
even
kids.
want to be on that.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is.
So I'm way
But
behind on that.
they are censoring a lot across all these platforms. Yeah.
It's a dangerous, and now we have our Homeland Security Department creating this disinformation governance board that is straight out of a George Orwell novel.
It is. Yeah.
It is. And it's like they read 1984 and are using it now as a handbook, right? Instead of a warning.
That's scary.
Yeah, it's really scary. I'm sorry, I've gotten us way off of the
No, it's good.
Sorry.
No, if we stop laughing, then we better lay down and die, really.
Yeah. But we have to recognize that all of this is interrelated. Nothing is disconnected.
It's part
Absolutely.
of yeah.
Yeah.
So that's right. So dangerous time for energy next month.
People, energy is there. It's going to be very interesting for all of us.
Yeah, that's
Yes,
right.
I think we could have fuel shortages in the United States. Summer driving season starts this month. People, kids are getting out of school right now. Actually, some school years are ending this week. And the summer driving season, demand for gasoline is going to rocket up, and the price will rocket up along with it. And with all the disruptions in the supply chains being caused by the lockdowns in China, we could have a very difficult situation this summer in the United States. It could be very tough.
The risk in Brazil is truck drivers strike. They are expecting some kind of.
Oh my gosh! Yeah, I
But
can't
you have
imagine.
been producing more oil. Petrobras has been expanding its production. That should be good. But how much of it is being sold on the domestic market?
Petrobras nowadays is producing around 3 million barrels a day. And for the internal consumption, 2 million and something barrels a day. We are exporting almost 1 million barrels a day. But when we do import from the United States diesel and gasoline around
fuels.
Yeah. So it's a good position in terms of energy supply.
It's a very good position in these days. Yeah.
But the problem is price and the consequence of the world confusion in Brazil, and Brazil itself is a very confused country too.
I think we all are.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much for that expression. Very good. Thank you so much for this meeting today. It was a pleasure for me.
Thank you.
Always
I really
a pleasure.
appreciate it. Y'all have a great week.
You too.
You too.
See you next Monday.
Next
Bye.
Monday. Bye.
Bye.